When Mount St. Helens erupted in May 1980, the world watched the largest landslide ever witnessed. It crashed down the mountainside, melting glaciers and boiling streams. It mixed with volcanic rock, creating mud flows of exceptional speed and ferocity. American volcanologists had never seen anything like it. It was a rampaging monster, laying waste the Washington countryside. And the only word they knew for it was an Indonesian one, lahar. Three-quarters of a cubic mile of Mount St. Helens vanished in seconds and poured down the river valleys. It created a volcanic hazard whose lethal reach extended many miles from its source. 30 miles below the volcano, Greg Drew was to witness its full force.
It was just incredible to watch the full-grown trees, the old-growth trees, just be knocked down like little sticks. And it just kept rising and rising. It was the most incredible thing I think I've ever seen.
Lahars can travel at more than 50 miles an hour and incorporate more debris on their relentless path.
There was just a tremendous crack, and the whole bridge just lifted, and the whole flat surface of the bridge floated down the river on top of the mud flow. It's just amazing.
Lahars can contain up to 90% of solid debris, making a thick and heavy mass that can float boulders, houses, and forests in its flow. Many miles downstream, they simply spread out and entomb everything.
And you were the only one that could stand up when we came in here.
Gary Rogenbach was to lose his first home in the mud flow.
I never dreamt that it would be this bad. I thought, well, there'd be a mud flow and, you know, the yard might get dirty and we'd have a little cleaning up to do, but I didn't dream that it would be what it was. Nobody did.
More than 200 houses were destroyed, leaving many people homeless. Tens of thousands of acres of prime forest, as well as bridges, roads, and trails, were swept away.
As far as my own personal feelings, I was pretty emotional. And I still get that way. You know, it was really something. I mean, you read about this stuff and see it on the news, and you know, you feel for the people, but unless you've actually been through it yourself, it's a different feeling.
For much of its history, the United States has largely been spared a major volcanic eruption. This was a wake-up call to a new and ominous threat. When the north face of Mount St. Helens blew out, it occurred in a sparsely settled area of Washington state. 10 years later, there was a much larger disaster waiting to happen in a densely populated community on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. "80 miles north of the Philippine capital are the broken ramparts of Mount Pinatubo. A community of 500,000 people live on the fertile volcanic plains on its flanks. They have lived for 600 years in the shadow of a volcano they had always believed was dormant. But this faith was to be shattered in 1991, when nature's fearsome power unleashed its fury. Pinatubo awoke on June the 15th, had exploded in an eruption 10 times the size of Mount St. Helens.
It was the end of the world, you know. It grew totally dark. You could hear the shouts of people panicking. It's as if it is Judgment Day, and the first thing that you had to do is to pray and ask forgiveness for all the sins that you have committed.
Pyroclastic flows of white-hot ash and gas scoured the hillsides, and ash clouds rose 40 kilometers into the atmosphere. On the volcano's slopes, 7 cubic kilometers of pulverized rock now lay in drifts hundreds of feet thick, totally reshaping the landscape.
One of the first dangers is the danger of falling debris collecting on houses and causing roofs to collapse. In fact, that was the main killer for this eruption.
350 people were to die in the first apocalyptic days. But many times that number would be killed and hundreds of villages destroyed in the years to come. The eruption had coincided with the annual typhoons that regularly lash the islands. Heavy rainfall drummed on the hot and loosely packed volcanic debris. It was to be the start of a terror that would haunt the people here long after the eruption ceased. Lahars.
Imagine a truck delivering wet concrete. That is the consistency of lahar. But expand that material to millions of cubic meters of debris, all moving at the same time. You have a lahar.
It casually swept away roads, bridges, and whole villages. Hundreds of people were killed, and 500,000 left homeless.
They also grow, they swell. They can erode material and incorporate material, and they can gain in size several times as they flow downstream. They can reach as far away as, say, 40 kilometers from the summit, through areas that don't anticipate the danger.
40 kilometers downstream from Mount Pinatubo is the town of Bacolor. Years after the eruption ceased, this town still suffers the onslaught of lahars. Most of its population of 80,000 have departed to resettlement camps.
About 20% of the population of Bacolor never left. They have been written off many times, but the people remain. There is almost fanatic adherence to the site.
Every year when the rains come, new lahars swamp the town, raising the land ever higher.
Some of them have houses that they have raised 2 or even 3 times. And some people gave up and others raised it a 4th time. And those are the buildings that you see now.
The heart of Bacolor is the half-buried church of San Guillermo, built in 1678. It is entombed in 10 meters of solid volcanic mud, but its bells still ring out the first warnings to the town. Rico Malgapu is a local architect who fought to save the lives of his family and many others in the very worst of the lahars. Now he fights to save the church.
No, hindi porke lumubog, wala nang chance.
Just because the church was buried, that doesn't mean it is finished.
Isang remembrance pa sa Bacolor.
This church is a tribute to Bacolor, and if it is lost, the history of Bacolor will be lost too.
Bacolor wala na, wipe out.
Bacolor has other dedicated friends. Kelvin Rodolfo is an American geologist who has stayed and fought for years to educate people about the lahar threat.
When I come back here, I feel frustration and a sense of anger because lahars are not mysterious. We understand how they work. We know what they can do.
Bacolor was originally a township of 21 large villages. Today, only 3 remain.
Here we are looking at a village that was buried by lahars in 1991. In 1994 and 1995, lahars came through here and carved this large channel that we see, not only exposing these houses to view, but making new lahars.
The broken remains of Mount Pinatubo are silent now, but its legacy of volcanic ash lies heavy on its slopes. Just 20 minutes of heavy rain can generate a lahar. It is not unusual to have 18 typhoons a year, so Philippine scientists are constantly monitoring the weather on the mountain slopes. Thousands of lahars have occurred, and all were triggered by typhoon rain. To combat the threat, a huge dike system has now been constructed. Its purpose is to contain and channel the lethal flows away from villages. But the first line of defense is Delta 5, high up on the flanks of the volcano. Here, policemen monitor the flow as it comes down the channel off the mountain. They can issue that vital 30 minutes early warning to the villages downstream. But in 1995, neither Delta 5 nor the newly built dikes was enough. prevent tragedy.
With more refinement, more performance, and more control. The new Rover 25. Extraordinary drive.
Chill out, boys. All right.
Ben,
Hello.
what are you doing here?
You know I can never sleep when you're on nights, so I thought I'd make you a nice breakfast.
That's so sweet.
Smirnoff Ice, as clear as your conscience.
It was September 1995, and Typhoon Mameng was sweeping the slopes of Pinatubo. Late one night, the policeman at Delta 5 reported floodwater passing by.
What was not realized was that this water coming down along the channel eroded and picked up material and bulked up into debris flows, the worst kind of lahar.
It gouged and eroded down the channel until it reached the dike system downstream. This was the last line of defense for one of the only untouched Bacolor villages called Cabalantien.
When it began to rain very hard, our whole family, my 5 children, including Ronnie, moved to the taller house of my in-laws.
Worried about the flooding, Dado and Annie were busy calming their 5 children. 9-year-old Ronnie was especially anxious that night.
That morning, he'd asked what he should do when the flood arrived. I said if there was wood to cling to, he should hang on to it so he wouldn't be carried off.
At 6 that morning, the rising floodwater suddenly changed to something more sinister.
Suddenly, the smell was odd. The noise was if many hundred elephants were coming, and the house was shaking vigorously.
A massive lahar had swelled up and breached the dike. It poured into the village.
And then suddenly, the house that we were on collapsed, and so we were separated.
Dado frantically rescued his wife and children, but Ronnie was still missing in the raging torrent.
Suddenly, one of our companions from the rooftop shouted, "This is a child, a human being." When they saw that it was Ronnie, they said, "Dado, come here. It's your child." So I went to him, but there was no life in him. There really wasn't.
Ronnie had died, remembering his mother's advice.
When we found him, he was hanging onto a piece of iron that he didn't let go of. That's what I told him to do, so that's what he did. However, he was really trapped.
Meanwhile, with no water to drink and only a tin of corned beef to sustain him, an exhausted Rico struggled all day in the lahar to save as many people as he could.
I don't know how many times I crossed and came back with someone. I placed all of them on the roof, sitting there in line.
All the following night, people huddled for protection on the precarious roof.
There were pigeons next to me, cockroaches, snakes, chickens, ducks. Every creature ignoring each other, huddled like this.
As dawn broke, the water had drained away, leaving an altered landscape.
By 6 a.m., we were amazed. It was as if we were in the middle of a wide, white desert.
Rico had saved 40 people from the lahar, but hundreds of people were killed or missing, and thousands of houses were destroyed. Ronnie was buried where he died, at the site of his home, now completely washed away.
But it hurts every time I come here. It hurts so much inside when I come back here. I don't want to see the cross.
Lahars can happen anywhere. All it takes is volcanic rock and water. In North America, Mount Rainier is especially dangerous. It carries 25 times more ice on its slopes than Mount St. Helens. The melting of a fraction of this could generate a lahar that would threaten hundreds of square miles of Washington state. Orting is one of the nearest towns to the mountain, with a population of over 3,500.
Orting is a wonderful place to live. It has a wonderful sense of community here. There's a lot of civic pride.
Many of these communities sitting on the lowlands around Mount Rainier know they are living on borrowed time.
I'm aware of all the potential hazards, and I still decided to move here anyway because those are kind of things we could work around.
There's an illusion of safety. You'd never think that, that this is a dangerous place.
In 1990, excavators digging foundations for a new housing development made a disturbing discovery. Across the valley, a local farmer also uncovered a mystery.
We've drilled 3 wells here, and every time they've hit big cedar trees laying on their side, some of them maybe 8-10 feet in diameter from the cores that came up.
The buried trees are the remains of an ancient forest, torn down by a wall of mud and rock. The whole town of Orting is built on a lahar flow from Mount Rainier. It has even left evidence of its power littering the surface.
The boulders that we see in the Orting area are all pieces of Mount Rainier, and they've just essentially been carried to their present positions by the lahar.
This is where the boulders came from. Sunset Amphitheater. It is a huge gash high on the western flank of Mount Rainier. 500 years ago, a wall of broken rock broke away and tore down the river valleys. 40 miles away, it spread out where Orting is today. Geologists like Kevin Scott have uncovered evidence of more than 55 massive lahar flows from Mount Rainier.
We know that there has been a really extensive record of lahars from Mount Rainier based on their deposits that have extended well over 100 kilometers from the volcano.
The largest flowed as far as Puget Sound and the cities of Tacoma and Seattle. Scientists are working high on Mount Rainier to try and discover if such a lahar could happen again. They are uncovering the mountain's terrible secrets.
It's a big mountain, so it gives the impression initially that it's very strong and solid, but in fact it's a very weak volcano, and it's collapsed many times because it's weak.
Its weakness lies in its lethal chemistry. Deep beneath its snow, it is still an active volcano, and subterranean heat is constantly melting its glaciers from below.
As you have these hot fluids migrating through the volcano, it changes the rock from a strong volcanic rock into a very weak rock that doesn't have much strength. So it can't support the outside unaltered parts of the volcano. And that is where the volcano can collapse.
And unleash a lahar. An eruption can do it. But the lahar Orting is built on was not caused by an eruption. Perhaps it was an earthquake. Perhaps the volcano rotted from within and simply gave way. No one knows for sure. They only know that if it happens again, there could be only 1 hour's warning for the towns below. This is Orting's early warning system. It waits patiently near the volcano's base. One day it will pick up the vibrations of a landslide and transmit a final vital warning signal before it is itself destroyed by the Lahar.
We hope that we can provide at least an hour's warning to the residents who live in the populated valleys downstream.
Today, thousands of families live in the pathways of the next big Lahar, and new homes are springing up all the time.
It's basically coming down as a wall, which just totally wipes everything clean.
Orting has an evacuation plan.
On your mark, can we get a 5 count, please?
At 11:58, a 5 count for 1807. 1.
The fire service will have 1 hour to warn and clear a valley of 5,000 people before the river of rock hits the town.
Right now, we haven't practiced it exactly, but we plan to grab our backpack, meet at the front door, and we're going to hike out of this area to the nearest ridge, which is less than approximately a mile away.
No one knows how smoothly the urgent evacuation will go.
Our first measure is to get everybody together, get them in the truck, and get out the best we can. Don't know how successful we're going to be because there's only one way out.
Some may not even hear the warning at all.
I might hear the lunch siren, but the other sirens I've never heard, except for when they tested it one time at the end of my road. I just don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. Maybe my grandchildren might worry about it, but I'm not.
Orting officials worry about it enough to test its alarm system on the first Monday of every month.
It's like a wake-up call. We would never want to think that we're putting our family in jeopardy by living here. And it seems so hard to believe that something that we love so much could eventually be so threatening.
For the people who live below Mount Rainier, it may be hard to imagine that such a day could come. But for the people of Bacolor, the horror of the Lahar is ever present. Since 1991, San Guillermo has rung its warning bells in vain, as 18 villages have vanished beneath the Lahar. And still, the people struggle to protect themselves from the relentless force of nature. The Lahar has always found a new path. Today is All Saints' Day. It marks the end of the rainy season and is a special day in the Philippines. It is a day when families come together to remember their dead. In Bacolor, this has a special meaning, for they have lost so much. Prayers and intentions are offered to the heavens. Beneath their feet, even the graveyard is entombed beneath 20 feet of solid Lahar. No one can ever be sure where loved ones lie.
If there's a lesson that can be learned at any place in the shadow of a volcano, is that yes, it can happen to you. It can happen. All you need to have large lahars is to have a large volume of loose volcanic debris and a sudden influx of water.
For Bacolor, the threat will eventually diminish as the loose volcanic rock is all washed down from Pinatubo. But Bacolor, like the towns around Mount Rainier, is built on lahar flows from ancient times. For where lahars have flowed once, however long it takes, they will one day come again. Next week on Savage Planet, a storm beyond all imagination, the American Storm of the Century. If you would like a copy of our booklet, send a check or postal order for £1.50, payable to Savage Planet, P.O. Box 3000, Manchester M63LA.
And Savage Planet will be back on Tuesday, the 2nd of May.